Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I had just settled under the warm weight of my blanket, the quiet hum of the night settling around me like a soft cocoon. My eyes fluttered shut, but then a subtle shift in the room made my senses tingle. A faint rustle, the soft brush of fabric against the carpet. I wasn't alone. My heartbeat jumped, rapid and uneven, as I realized the shape moving closer was him. He thought I was asleep. I could feel it in the slight pause before his hand brushed against mine, a touch light enough to be accidental, but electrifying in its intensity. My eyes snapped open, catching him in a moment frozen between hesitation and daring, his gaze meeting mine in a flash of unspoken tension. A playful smirk tugged at his lips, daring me to react, and the air between us seemed to thrum with anticipation. Before I could speak, he shifted closer, the warmth of his presence pressing against me. It was almost unbearable, my skin prickling, a shiver running down my spine. A charged silence settled, where even breathing felt loud. The closeness was sudden and intimate, a secret thrill neither of us dared name aloud. I felt the heat of our proximity, the faint scent of him mingling with the night air, and an undeniable pulse of attraction that made my stomach twist with nervous excitement. His hand hovered, teasing the edge of my arm, and I caught myself holding my breath. I wanted to pull away, but something deeper, curiosity, tension, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist, kept me rooted in place. The room was quiet except for the shared rhythm of our rapid heartbeats, and I realized we were suspended in a moment that could tilt either way, fragile and potent all at once. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the slightest creak from the floor jolted us both, and I froze, knowing whatever came next would change everything. The night held its breath with us, leaving a question lingering: would he retreat, or step closer into the dangerous thrill that neither of us could ignore? I remember the first time I really noticed him, not as a child who needed guidance, but as someone who stirred something unexpected inside me. He was always around, of course, in that familiar way a stepson becomes part of your daily life, laughing at my jokes, brushing past me in the kitchen, lingering just a moment too long at the doorway. At first, I chalked it up to youthful curiosity, maybe even a touch of rebellion, but lately, it felt different, heavier, charged with something neither of us had dared name. He carried his own burdens. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed when he thought no one was looking, the way his eyes sometimes clouded with frustration or guilt. He was so young, yet I sensed he wrestled with emotions far deeper than his age allowed. And somehow, our closeness had become a comfort, a fragile line he could cross when the world felt too heavy. Last week, we'd been in the living room, both pretending to focus on the movie playing on the screen. But every time I reached for the blanket or sipped my tea, I caught him staring, those quiet, stolen glances that made my pulse skip. There was an unspoken tension in the air, electric and forbidden, and yet somehow comforting. My mind warned me to step back, to protect boundaries, but my body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly toward him, feeling that pull, that quiet thrill in just being near him. He had a way of speaking softly, almost teasingly, that drew me in. Small touches, a hand brushing a stray hair from my face, his fingers lingering on the edge of a table, set my nerves alight. I wanted to laugh it off, to call it accidental, but the spark of recognition in his eyes told me he felt it too. The air between us was a mix of longing and restraint, a delicate balance of curiosity and caution. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself replaying fleeting moments, our knees brushing under the table, our fingers barely touching as we reached for the same glass, the way he seemed to notice things about me no one else did. Each small instance carried weight, building an invisible bridge between us, a thread of tension that hummed quietly beneath ordinary life. And tonight, in the quiet darkness, that thread had snapped into something tangible. There was a closeness we couldn't ignore, a magnetic pull neither of us dared to name. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest, mirrored in his subtle movements beside me. The night held us suspended in anticipation, teasing what might happen without ever promising a conclusion, an unspoken invitation that left everything hanging on the edge of possibility. The evening air carried a subtle tension, the kind that made every small sound feel amplified. He sat on the edge of the couch, pretending to scroll through his phone, but I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, heavy and teasing. Every glance he cast seemed deliberate, as if he were testing boundaries I wasn't ready to acknowledge. My pulse thudded in my chest, a mix of nervous excitement and the delicious fear of what we were both dancing around. Earlier that day, I had noticed him lingering by the kitchen counter while I brewed coffee. His casual curiosity had felt deliberate, almost probing, and a twinge of jealousy prickled me when I remembered a friend of his texting him, making him smile in a way that was reserved for no one but me, or at least, that's how it felt. It was absurd, a mix of maternal protectiveness and a selfish ache I barely understood. Yet it ignited a spark, a reminder that emotions aren't always rational. He shifted slightly on the couch, and our knees brushed accidentally, or maybe not. My breath hitched, a shiver running down my spine as I felt the electric closeness. His eyes met mine again, a mixture of mischief and longing, daring me to respond. Every subtle movement, the way he leaned forward, the playful tilt of his head, felt loaded with unspoken promises. I wanted to look away, to tell myself this was impossible, but instead, I leaned in just slightly, unable to resist the pull. The silence between us became a stage for temptation. Every small gesture, his hand hovering near mine, the fleeting brush of his shoulder against mine, was a whisper of something forbidden. My mind raced, warning me of the consequences, but my body betrayed me with its craving, every nerve ending alert to his nearness. It was a delicate, thrilling game of restraint and desire, each moment stretching out in anticipation. And then, just as he seemed to inch closer, the faint creak of the hallway floor froze us both. The outside world intruded for a heartbeat, reminding us of boundaries, yet in that pause, the tension only deepened. The question hung in the air, would we retreat, or would desire finally tip the scales? The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that seemed to amplify every little sound, the creak of the floor, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the subtle rustle of fabric as he moved closer. We were alone, the world outside forgotten, wrapped in an unspoken understanding that something was about to shift. Every glance, every breath, felt loaded with intent. I had told myself to stay composed, to remind myself that this closeness was innocent, but the pull between us was impossible to ignore. He sat across from me, knees nearly touching, and there was a fleeting brush of fingers as he reached for his drink. My chest tightened at the contact, the sensation sending a shiver down my spine. The charged energy in the room was tangible, a current we both seemed unable, or unwilling, to resist. He tilted his head slightly, eyes glinting with mischief and something softer, something raw. There was a boldness in the way he lingered near me, a subtle challenge in his smile, daring me to acknowledge the tension that had been building for weeks. I felt my own heartbeat accelerate, my pulse echoing in my ears as I realized how dangerously close we were to crossing an invisible line. Every subtle movement was a tease, his fingers brushing a stray hair from my shoulder, my hand accidentally brushing his. There was no escaping the magnetism, the shared awareness that every small touch was amplified in the quiet of the night. I wanted to pull away, to regain control, but the magnetic pull drew me closer, a delicious tension that left me breathless. Then, just as our eyes locked again, he shifted slightly, the air between us tightening like a wire pulled taut. Neither of us spoke, but the silent question hung heavy, what happens next? I could feel the edge of anticipation, the moment before everything could change. The room seemed to shrink, every heartbeat louder, every nerve alive, every glance a spark threatening to ignite a fire neither of us could control. And then, a sudden sound from the hallway, a shadow passing just outside the door. We froze, the suspense slicing through the charged intimacy. Would we retreat into safety, or surrender to the temptation that had been building between us? The answer was hanging in the air, impossible to ignore. The tension in the room had reached a point where silence was impossible. Every glance between us seemed to spark electricity, every slight movement magnified in the quiet night. I could feel his energy, restless and daring, and I realized with a jolt that we were teetering on the edge of something neither of us had ever admitted aloud. I reached for the book I'd left on the bedside table, pretending to be absorbed, but I couldn't ignore the way his eyes followed every motion, attentive and intense. He shifted closer again, close enough that our arms brushed. My heart skipped a beat, that familiar mix of nervousness and excitement coursing through me. But then, just as the moment seemed about to tip, a sudden sound from my phone made us both startle, a message from someone I hadn't expected. The screen lit up the dim room, and there it was, a text revealing something I never imagined he would admit. "I've wanted to tell you this for weeks. I feel something I shouldn't." My breath caught. He froze, watching me, realizing that his secret had finally been exposed. The words were innocent but devastatingly honest, a confession of feelings that had been simmering under the surface, dangerous only because we had never acknowledged them. I swallowed hard, the reality of the moment crashing over me. My chest tightened, not with shame, but with the undeniable awareness that the attraction was mutual, raw, and uncontainable. The risk wasn't about breaking a rule, it was about admitting to ourselves what we had been dancing around for months. And yet, the intensity of that shared truth was intoxicating. He reached out, a tentative hand hovering near mine, testing the boundary without crossing it. The air between us was electric, heavy with anticipation, our mutual longing mirrored in every subtle movement. It was a delicate dance, full of risk and emotional charge, yet restrained enough to remain innocent to an outside eye. Then, a sudden knock on the door froze both of us mid-motion. The outside world intruded, a reminder that our connection was both thrilling and forbidden. We exchanged a glance, a mix of relief, tension, and something unspoken, a shared understanding that what had just been revealed would change everything. And in that suspended moment, the room seemed to hum with possibilities, the spark of attraction so strong it was impossible to ignore. The twist hung heavy, our feelings were no longer hidden, and the question remained, would we retreat into safety, or embrace the undeniable bond that had been building in secret? The answer was nowhere in sight, leaving every heartbeat full of suspense, longing, and the thrill of the forbidden. The silence after the revelation felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the room itself were holding its breath. We both sat frozen, absorbing the weight of what had just been admitted. The thrill of forbidden attraction had collided with reality, leaving a swirl of emotions, nervousness, guilt, desire, and a strange exhilaration that neither of us could ignore. I took a deep breath, finally breaking the tension. "We can't pretend anymore," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. Whatever this is between us, it's real. And we need to figure out what it means." My words hung in the air, charged and daring, and I watched him struggle with his own reaction. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, a mixture of frustration and longing in his eyes. "I know," he admitted, voice low, almost vulnerable. "I've tried to ignore it, but every time we're close, it's impossible. I can't pretend either." The honesty hit me like a jolt. The barriers we had both clung to for months were crumbling, leaving raw, unfiltered emotion in their place. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, breathing synchronized in a tense rhythm. Every glance, every subtle shift, carried the weight of the attraction and the risk we had both sensed for so long. Then, almost instinctively, he reached out, fingers brushing lightly against mine. The contact was small, careful, yet it sent a rush through me, a confirmation that the connection between us was undeniable. Tears prickled my eyes, not from shame, but from relief and recognition. This tension, this emotional storm, had built up for months, and now it was finally being confronted head-on. "We need to be honest," I said, voice steadier now. "With ourselves, and with each other. He nodded, and in that simple gesture, a silent understanding passed between us. We were stepping into uncharted territory together. The air still buzzed with intensity, but it had shifted from uncertainty to something more deliberate, an acknowledgement of the bond we could no longer ignore, even if it was complicated. The room seemed smaller now, closer, intimate, not in a way that crossed boundaries, but in a way that made every look, every movement feel electric. We were both aware of the risks, the judgments, the complications, yet there was a thrill in the honesty, a sense of liberation in finally confronting the truth. And as we sat there, hands almost touching, eyes locked in quiet intensity, the storm of emotions began to settle. A new chapter was starting, one where feelings could finally be acknowledged, choices faced, and the tension transformed into something meaningful. But even in this resolution, the question lingered, what comes next for us, now that the walls are down and the attraction is out in the open? The room was bathed in the gentle glow of a bedside lamp, soft light spilling across the blankets and casting long, warm shadows. After the storm of emotions, the tension had finally begun to ease, replaced by a quiet, almost magical understanding between us. We sat closer now, the nervousness replaced by a comfortable closeness, a feeling of being truly seen and accepted. He reached out, this time deliberately, and our fingers intertwined naturally, without hesitation. It was a small gesture, but in it lay months of unspoken words, a culmination of the tension, curiosity, and longing that had been building between us. I felt the steady warmth of his hand against mine, the slight tremor of excitement running through both of us. Every nerve felt alive, every glance heavy with quiet affection. I don't know what happens next, he admitted softly, voice full of vulnerability. But I know I don't want to lose this. Not this, us. I smiled, a mix of relief and happiness washing over me. Neither do I, whatever this is, however complicated, I want to explore it with you, I said, my voice calm, confident, but full of emotion. The tension that had held us captive for weeks now transformed into trust, connection, and anticipation for a shared future. We leaned slightly closer, not out of impatience, but out of a shared need to be near one another. Our eyes met, holding a conversation without words, laughter flickering in the corners of our expressions. There was no rush, no pressure, only the warmth of closeness and the thrill of knowing that we had crossed a boundary from fear to honesty. He rested his head lightly on my shoulder, a soft, tentative gesture that carried more meaning than any words could. I wrapped an arm around him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and realized that the complicated attraction we had danced around was no longer forbidden, it was ours, acknowledged and mutual. In that quiet, intimate moment, I understood that this was not just a fleeting thrill, but a bond built on honesty, trust, and undeniable connection. The world outside could wait, right here, right now, we had each other. And in the soft glow of the lamp, with fingers entwined and hearts beating in tandem, it felt like the start of something truly beautiful. The night stretched around us, full of possibility and gentle affection, leaving the question of the future open, but the present perfect, a tender, romantic closure that was emotionally satisfying, full of warmth and intimacy without crossing into anything explicit.